Tycoon He left his wife expecting, and 3 years later, he met his son at a charity event. "Mr. Cole, your 9 o'clock is here," a voice crackles through the intercom. Richard doesn't flinch, doesn't even blink. "Send them in," he replies, his voice a low rumble of authority. The door opens, and a nervous young executive enters, clutching a portfolio like a lifeline. Richard turns, his piercing blue eyes sizing up the newcomer in an instant. "Well?" Richard asks, impatience simmering beneath the surface. The executive swallows hard. "Sir, the quarterly reports are in, and we've exceeded projections by 15%. Richard interrupts, a hint of a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "I know. I always know." The younger man's eyes widen. "How did you dash? Because this is my world," Richard says, gesturing to the vista beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Every deal, every stock fluctuation, every whisper on Wall Street. I feel it in my bones." He moves to his desk, a massive slab of rare wood worth more than most people's yearly salaries. With a casual flick of his wrist, he dismisses the executive. "That'll be all. Make sure the board knows I expect a 20% increase next quarter." As the door closes, Richard sinks into his chair, allowing himself a moment of satisfaction. He's built an empire from nothing, clawed his way to the top through sheer force of will. Every luxury surrounding him, the rare art on the walls, the handcrafted furniture, the view that stretches for miles, is a trophy, a reminder of his victories. But as he swivels to face the cityscape once more, a fleeting shadow crosses his face. For all his wealth, for all his power, there's an emptiness that gnaws at him in quiet moments like these. A void he's tried to fill with acquisitions and conquests, but it persists, stubborn as a splinter beneath the skin. Richard shakes off the feeling, his jaw tightening with renewed determination. He reaches for the phone, ready to close another deal, to expand his reach even further. Because in his world, there's no room for weakness, no place for doubt. He is Richard Cole, tycoon extraordinaire, and the world bends to his will. Little does he know, the events set in motion this very day will challenge everything he believes about success, about power, and about the true cost of ambition. "Mr. Cole, your wife is here. She's insisting on seeing you." A flicker of irritation crosses Richard's face. He takes a deep breath, composing himself before responding. "Send her in." The door opens, and Elena Cole strides in, her eyes blazing with a mix of fury and hurt. She's beautiful, even in her anger, but Richard barely notices. His mind is already racing, calculating how much time this interruption will cost him. "You missed the doctor's appointment." Again, Elena says, her voice trembling with barely contained emotion. Richard sighs, leaning back in his chair. "I told you I had a crucial meeting." "The Morrison deal the Morrison deal?" Elena interrupts, her voice rising. "What about our deal, Richard? What about the promises you made when we got married?" The air in the office grows thick with tension. Richard stands, moving to pour himself a drink. "Elena, we've been over this. My work your work is destroying our marriage." Elena exclaims, tears welling in her eyes. "Do you even remember the last time we had dinner together? The last time we talked about something other than your next big acquisition?" Richard turns, his expression a mask of cool indifference. But beneath the surface, a storm of emotions rages, frustration, guilt, and a gnawing fear he refuses to acknowledge. "I'm building an empire, Elena. For us. For our future." Elena shakes her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "Our future? Richard, I'm pregnant. We're having a baby in 3 months, and you can't even make it to a single appointment." The words hit Richard like a physical blow. He knew about the pregnancy, of course, but hearing it stated so bluntly, with the immediacy of 3 months, suddenly feels real in a way it hadn't before. For once, the great Richard Cole is at a loss for words. Elena's voice softens, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "This is our chance, Richard, to be a family, to have something real, something that matters more than all. This," she gestures to the opulent office. For a moment, Richard's carefully constructed world seems to waver. He looks at his wife, really looks at her, and sees the love, the hope, and the fear in her eyes. A part of him wants to go to her, to hold her and promise that everything will be different. But then his phone buzzes. A text flashes across the screen, news of a potential hostile takeover of one of his companies. In that instant, Richard's world snaps back into focus. "I have to take this," he says, already reaching for the phone. Elena's face crumples, the hope dying in her eyes. "Of course you do," she whispers, turning to leave. As the door closes behind her, Richard is already barking orders into his phone, pushing away the image of his wife's tears, the thought of the child growing inside her. He tells himself he's doing this for them, that they'll understand someday. But deep down, in a place he refuses to examine too closely, Richard Cole knows he's standing at a crossroads, and the path he's choosing may cost him everything that truly matters. Late one night, the office empty save for the cleaning staff, Richard sits at his desk, surrounded by stacks of reports and financial projections. His tie is loosened, his shirt rumpled, dark circles under his eyes betraying his exhaustion. A gentle knock on the door startles him from his concentration. It's Maria, the elderly cleaning lady who's worked in the building for decades. "Mr. Cole," she says softly, concern etched on her weathered face. "It's past midnight. Shouldn't you be home with your wife?" Richard blinks, momentarily disoriented. I have work to finish, Maria." "The Asian markets dash will still be there tomorrow," she interrupts, with a boldness few would dare use with Richard Cole. "But your child is growing every day." Her words hit him like a splash of cold water. Richard leans back in his chair, suddenly feeling the weight of every sleepless night, every missed moment. "I don't know how to do this, Maria," he confesses, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know how to build empires, how to crush competitors. But a family? A child? Maria steps closer, her eyes kind but firm. "Mr. Cole, life isn't a balance sheet. You can't trade love for success and expect to come out ahead." Richard stands, moving to the window. The city stretches out before him, a glittering tapestry of lights and possibilities. But for the first time in years, it doesn't fill him with the usual thrill of conquest. "What if I'm not cut out for this?" he asks, more to himself than to Maria. "What if I'm too damaged, too focused on success to be a good father?" Maria's reflection appears beside his in the glass. "The fact that you're asking that question shows you care more than you think." Richard turns to face her, conflict written across his features. "I have an opportunity," he says slowly, as if the words pain him. "A chance to expand into Europe. It would mean being away for months, maybe longer." Maria's eyes widen in understanding. "And your child would be born while I'm gone," Richard finishes, the words hanging heavy in the air. A long silence stretches between them. When Maria speaks again, her voice is soft but filled with a lifetime of wisdom. "Mr. Cole, at the end of your life, you won't wish you'd spent more time at the office. But you might regret every moment you missed with your family." She turns to leave, pausing at the door. "The choice is yours, Mr. Cole. But remember, some things, once lost, can never be regained." As the door closes behind her, Richard sinks back into his chair. He stares at the phone on his desk, the email draft on his computer screen confirming his acceptance of the European venture. His finger hovers over the send button, trembling slightly. In this moment, Richard Cole, the man who always knows his next move, finds himself paralyzed by indecision. The city hums outside, oblivious to the war raging in one man's heart. As the clock ticks relentlessly forward, Richard knows that whatever choice he makes in the next few minutes will alter the course of his life forever. Richard stands, his movements mechanical as he gathers his things. The weight of his choice settles on his shoulders like a lead cloak as he makes his way home through the empty pre-dawn streets. He enters the penthouse silently, hoping not to wake Elena. But as he steps into the bedroom, he finds her sitting up in bed, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "You're leaving, aren't you?" she asks, her voice small and resigned. Richard nods, unable to meet her eyes. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Elena. I have to go. Elena's laugh is hollow, devoid of humor. And what about our once-in-a-lifetime opportunity? Our child? I'll be back as soon as I can, Richard promises, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. I'll call every day. I'll dash. Save it. Richard, Elena interrupts, her voice suddenly hard. Just go. Do what you do best. The silence that follows is deafening. Richard moves to pack, every rustle of clothing, every zip of his suitcase feeling like a betrayal. Elena watches him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. As he's about to leave, Richard pauses at the doorway. Elena, I dash. Don't, she says, her voice breaking. Just don't. Richard nods, swallowing hard. He takes one last look at his wife, memorizing the curve of her belly, the pain in her eyes. Then he turns and walks away, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. As he steps into the elevator, Richard catches a glimpse of his reflection in the mirrored walls. For a moment, he doesn't recognize the man staring back at him, this stranger with haunted eyes and a face etched with guilt. The elevator descends, each floor taking him further from the life he's leaving behind. Richard closes his eyes, trying to convince himself that this is the right decision, that the success waiting for him in Europe will be worth the sacrifice. But as he steps out into the cool morning air, a car waiting to take him to the airport, Richard can't shake the feeling that he's making the biggest mistake of his life. The car pulls away from the curb, carrying Richard towards his future and away from the family he's leaving behind. As the city skyline recedes in the rearview mirror, a single tear escapes, rolling down his cheek, a rare moment of vulnerability for a man who's built his life on being invulnerable. In that moment, Richard Cole, master of the business world, feels utterly lost. The road ahead stretches out before him, full of promise and opportunity. But the road not taken, the one leading back to Elena and their unborn child, haunts him, a specter of what might have been. As the car merges onto the highway towards the airport, Richard stares out the window, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He's made his choice, set his course. But as the first rays of dawn break over the horizon, he can't help but wonder, at what cost? You're doing great, Elena, her sister Sarah encourages, wiping sweat from Elena's brow. Just a little more. Elena nods, gathering her strength for the next push. As the pain intensifies, she can't help but cry out, Richard, Richard, I need you. But Richard isn't there. He's thousands of miles away, unaware that at this very moment, his child is about to enter the world. The doctor's calm voice cuts through Elena's anguish. I can see the head. One more big push, Elena. With a primal scream, Elena gives everything she has left. Suddenly, the room is filled with the piercing cry of a newborn. It's a boy, the doctor announces, holding up the squirming, red-faced infant. As the nurses clean and wrap the baby, Elena collapses back onto the pillows, tears streaming down her face. Joy and sorrow war within her heart as she reaches out for her son. Hello, Thomas, she whispers, cradling the tiny bundle against her chest. I'm your mommy. Sarah watches the scene, her own eyes glistening with tears. He's beautiful, Elena. Have you called Richard yet? Elena's face hardens for a moment. No, she says softly. No, I haven't. As if sensing the tension, little Thomas begins to fuss. Elena soothes him, her focus entirely on the miracle in her arms. In this moment, the pain of Richard's absence fades, replaced by an overwhelming love for her son. Hours later, as the hospital settles into the quiet rhythm of night, Elena sits in her room, Thomas sleeping peacefully in the bassinet beside her. She holds her phone, staring at Richard's number on the screen. Her finger hovers over the call button, trembling slightly. She wants to share this moment with him, to tell him about their beautiful son. But another part of her, the part still raw from his abandonment, holds her back. In the end, she sets the phone aside, choosing instead to reach out and gently stroke Thomas's tiny hand. It's just you and me, little one, she murmurs. But don't worry. I'll be enough for both of us. As Elena drifts off to sleep, exhausted but filled with a fierce new purpose, the first light of dawn begins to creep through the hospital window. It's the dawn of a new day, but more than that, it's the dawn of a new life for both Elena and Thomas. Across the ocean, in a luxurious London office, Richard Cole sits at his desk, buried in work. He pauses for a moment, a strange feeling washing over him. He glances at his phone, almost expecting it to ring, but the screen remains dark, silent. Shaking off the odd sensation, Richard returns to his work, unaware that at this very moment, his life has changed forever. His son has been born, and he wasn't there to witness it. The gulf between Richard and his family, already wide, has just become an ocean. And as the sun rises on this new day, the question hangs in the air. Will Richard ever find his way back to the family he left behind? Or has his choice set him on a path of no return? Mr. Cole, his assistant's voice crackles through the intercom. The board is ready for you. Richard straightens his tie, his reflection in the glass showing a man at the pinnacle of his career. But his eyes, once blazing with determination, now hold a weariness that no amount of success can erase. He strides into the boardroom, a hush falling over the assembled executives. Richard takes his seat at the head of the table, surveying the faces around him, some eager, some nervous, all waiting for his next move. Gentlemen, he begins, his voice carrying the weight of authority. We've achieved what many thought impossible. In 3 years, we've doubled our market share and expanded into 12 new countries. Murmurs of approval ripple through the room. Richard continues, but I didn't call you here to celebrate. I called you here because it's time to push further. He outlines his vision for the next phase of expansion, his words painting a picture of even greater success, of an empire that spans continents. The executives listen, enraptured, scribbling notes and nodding enthusiastically. As the meeting concludes, Richard finds himself alone in the boardroom. He should feel triumphant, exhilarated by the prospect of new conquests. Instead, an inexplicable emptiness gnaws at him. His phone buzzes, a reminder of a charity gala he's expected to attend that evening. Richard sighs, reaching for his jacket. Another night, another event, another opportunity to network and further his ambitions. As he's about to leave, his eye catches on a framed photo on the wall, a snapshot from the day he opened his first office in London. He looks younger, his smile genuine, full of hope and excitement for the future. Richard stares at the photo, a flood of memories washing over him. He remembers the day he left New York, the pain in Elena's eyes, the child he's never met. For a moment, the carefully constructed walls around his emotions begin to crumble. Mr. Cole, his assistant's voice breaks through his reverie. Your car is waiting. Richard blinks, composing himself. Thank you. I'll be right down. As he walks towards the elevator, Richard can't shake the feeling that something fundamental is missing from his life. He's achieved everything he set out to do, surpassed even his wildest ambitions. And yet, the elevator descends, carrying Richard towards another night of schmoozing and deal-making. But as he watches the floor numbers tick down, a part of him wonders if he's been climbing the wrong ladder all along. Little does Richard know that fate has a surprise in store for him. At the charity gala he's about to attend, his carefully constructed world is about to collide with the life he left behind. And the man who always has a plan will find himself utterly unprepared for what's to come. As the elevator doors open to the lobby, Richard steps out, straightening his shoulders and putting on the mask of the confident tycoon. But beneath the surface, a storm is brewing, one that threatens to upend everything he's built over the past 3 years. Thomas, sweetie, please put on your shoes. We're going to be late, Elena calls out, her voice tinged with exhaustion. A whirlwind of energy, 3-year-old Thomas races into the room, his dark curls bouncing with each step. No shoes, Mommy. I want to be a superhero. Elena kneels down, meeting her son's eyes that are so painfully reminiscent of Richard's. Even superheroes wear shoes sometimes, buddy. How about we make a deal? Shoes now, and you can wear your cape to the event. Thomas considers this for a moment, his little brow furrowed in concentration. Okay. He finally agrees, but I get to be Super Thomas all night. As Elena helps him with his shoes, she can't help but marvel at her son's spirit. Despite the challenges of single motherhood, despite the void left by Richard's absence, Thomas has grown into a bright, joyful child. Once they're both ready, Elena takes a deep breath, steeling herself for the evening ahead. The charity gala they're attending is a big deal, a chance for her small graphic design business to make important connections. But more than that, it's a step towards the future she's building for herself and Thomas. Ready to go, Super Thomas? She asks, holding out her hand. Thomas grabs it enthusiastically, practically pulling her towards the door. Let's go save the world, Mommy. As they make their way to the event, Elena can't help but feel a mix of pride and anxiety. She's come so far since Richard left, building a life and a career from scratch while raising Thomas. But nights like these, surrounded by New York's elite, always bring back painful memories of the life she once had. Arriving at the gala, Elena straightens Thomas's cape and smooths down her own dress. Remember, sweetie, best behavior tonight. Okay? Thomas nods solemnly, then breaks into a grin. Can I fly around the room? Elena laughs, some of her tension melting away. How about we save the flying for later? For now, let's go meet some new friends. As they enter the glittering ballroom, Elena is unaware that fate has set the stage for an encounter that will change everything. Somewhere in this very room, Richard Cole is about to come face to face with the family he left behind. Elena takes a deep breath, squeezing Thomas's hand for reassurance. All right, Super Thomas, she whispers, let's show them what we're made of. With that, they step further into the crowd, the noise and lights enveloping them. The night is young, and the air is thick with possibility. Little do they know that their world is about to be turned upside down, as the past and present collide in ways they could never have imagined. Richard, so glad you could make it, booms the voice of Marcus Harding, CEO of a rival corporation. I heard you just closed the Peterson deal. Impressive work. Richard forces a smile, raising his champagne glass in acknowledgement. Thank you, Marcus. It was a team effort. As Marcus launches into a discussion about market trends, Richard's attention wanders. His gaze drifts across the room, taking in the opulent decorations, the orchestra playing softly in the corner, the couples swaying on the dance floor. Suddenly, a flash of movement catches his eye. A small figure in a red cape darts between the guests, weaving through the forest of legs with childish glee. Richard blinks, momentarily thrown off balance. For a split second, he could have sworn, "Richard, are you all right?" Marcus's concerned voice snaps him back to the present. "Yes, sorry," Richard mumbles, shaking his head to clear it. "I thought I saw." His voice trails off as his eyes lock onto a familiar face across the room. Time seems to slow down as he takes in the sight of Elena, looking more beautiful than ever in a simple blue dress. She's speaking animatedly with a group of people, her smile bright and genuine. Richard's heart begins to race. He excuses himself from Marcus, barely hearing the man's confused response as he starts making his way through the crowd. His mind is reeling. What is Elena doing here? And that child? As he gets closer, he sees the little boy in the cape tugging on Elena's dress. She bends down, listening intently to whatever he's saying, then laughs and ruffles his hair affectionately. Richard freezes just a few feet away from them. The realization hits him like a physical blow. This is his son, the child he's never met, the family he left behind. Elena straightens up, her eyes scanning the room. And then, like a scene from a dream, or perhaps a nightmare, their gazes meet. For a moment, the noise of the gala fades away. It's just Richard and Elena, staring at each other across a gulf of 3 years and countless unspoken words. Elena's eyes widen in shock, then narrow with a mix of emotions Richard can't even begin to decipher. The little boy, his son, looks up at his mother, then follows her gaze to Richard. "Mommy," the child's voice breaks the spell. "Who's that man?" Elena swallows hard, her voice barely above a whisper as she answers, That's your father, Thomas. Richard takes a step forward, his mouth dry, his heart pounding. He has faced down boardrooms full of hostile executives, navigated high-stakes negotiations, but nothing has ever terrified him as much as this moment. Elena, he manages to say, his voice hoarse with emotion. I didn't know you'd be here. Elena's response is cut off by Thomas, who looks up at Richard with wide, curious eyes. Are you really my daddy? He asks innocently. The question hangs in the air, loaded with 3 years of absence and unspoken regret. Richard feels the weight of every choice he's made, every moment he's missed, pressing down on him. As he struggles to find the right words, Richard Cole, the man who always has an answer, who always knows his next move, finds himself utterly speechless in the face of the family he left behind. Yes, I am, Richard finally manages, his voice barely above a whisper as he kneels down to Thomas's level. His eyes drink in every detail of his son's face, the curl of his hair, the shape of his nose, the curiosity shining in his eyes. Thomas tilts his head, studying Richard with the unabashed directness only a child can muster. Why haven't I seen you before? Mommy says you've been away on a very long business trip. Richard's heart clenches at the innocent question and the gentle explanation Elena has given their son. He glances up at Elena, seeing the storm of emotions playing across her face, hurt, anger, and something else he can't quite identify. I have been away, Richard stammers, feeling completely out of his depth. For far too long. Elena steps forward, placing a protective hand on Thomas's shoulder. Thomas, sweetie, why don't you go find Aunt Sarah? I need to talk to your father for a moment. Thomas looks between his parents, sensing the tension but not fully understanding it. Okay, Mommy, but can I talk to Daddy more later? We'll see, Elena says softly, giving Thomas a gentle push towards where her sister is standing across the room. As Thomas scampers off, his cape fluttering behind him, Elena turns to face Richard. The warmth in her eyes from moments ago has been replaced by a steely resolve. What are you doing here, Richard? She asks, her voice low and controlled. Richard straightens up, feeling the full weight of Elena's gaze. I'm here for the charity gala. I had no idea you'd be here. Elena, Save it, Elena cuts him off, her composure cracking slightly. 3 years, Richard. 3 years without a word. And now you just show up here. The pain in her voice cuts through Richard like a knife. He takes a step closer, instinctively reaching out to her, but Elena backs away. I know I have no right to ask, Richard says, his voice thick with regret, but please, can we talk? Somewhere private. Elena looks around, suddenly aware of the curious glances from nearby guests. She nods curtly, leading Richard to a quiet corner of the ballroom. Once they're alone, Richard turns to her, his carefully constructed facade crumbling. Elena, I'm so sorry. I know that doesn't begin to cover it, but you're right, it doesn't. Elena interrupts, her eyes blazing. Do you have any idea what it's been like, raising Thomas alone? Explaining to him why his father isn't around. Richard feels each word like a physical blow. I made a terrible mistake, he says, his voice breaking. I thought I was doing the right thing, building a future for us, but I was wrong. So terribly wrong. For a moment, Elena's anger seems to waver, replaced by a profound sadness. We needed you here, Richard. Not your money, not your empire. Just you. The weight of his choices crashes down on Richard. He sees the life he could have had, the bedtime stories, the first steps, the countless moments he's missed with his son. Is there? Richard hesitates, fear and hope warring in his chest. Is there any way I can make this right? Elena looks at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. I don't know, Richard. That's not a decision I can make right now, especially not here. As if on cue, they hear Thomas's voice calling out, Mommy, Daddy. The little boy is running towards them, his cape streaming behind him like a banner of hope. Richard and Elena exchange a look, a mixture of uncertainty, lingering hurt, and the faintest glimmer of possibility. As Thomas reaches them, launching into an excited recounting of his adventures at the gala. Richard realizes that this moment is a crossroads. He has a chance, perhaps his last chance, to be the father and husband he should have been all along. But as he watches Elena scoop Thomas into her arms, he knows that earning back their trust will be the greatest challenge he's ever faced. The night stretches out before them, filled with unspoken words and uncertain futures. And as the gala continues around them, Richard Cole stands on the precipice of a decision that will shape not just his life, but the lives of the family he left behind. And then I flew over the big chocolate fountain. "Mommy," Thomas exclaims, his arms spread wide to demonstrate his imaginary flight. Elena chuckles, her eyes softening as she looks at her son. "Did you now? I hope Super Thomas didn't get any chocolate on his cape." Richard watches this interaction, a lump forming in his throat. He's missed so much, and the reality of it hits him like a physical blow. "Thomas," he says softly, drawing the boy's attention. I'd love to hear more about your adventures. Maybe we could sit down somewhere." Elena's eyes dart to Richard, a mix of caution and something that might be hope flickering across her face. She nods slightly, leading them to a quiet table in the corner of the ballroom. As they settle into their seats, Thomas turns to Richard with wide, curious eyes. "Daddy, do you fight bad guys too? Is that why you've been away so long?" The innocent question catches Richard off guard. He glances at Elena, who gives him a look that clearly says, "Handle this carefully." Richard takes a deep breath. "No, Thomas, I don't fight bad guys. I made some mistakes. I thought I was doing the right thing by working far away, but I was wrong. I should have been here with you and your mom." Thomas tilts his head, processing this information. "But you're here now, right? Are you going to stay?" The question hangs in the air, heavy with implication. Richard feels the weight of Elena's gaze on him, waiting for his answer. I want to," Richard says, his voice thick with emotion. "If your mom thinks it's okay, I'd like to spend more time with you, to get to know you." Elena's breath catches, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Richard," she begins, her voice barely above a whisper, "you can't just walk back into our lives and expect everything to be okay. It's not that simple." Richard nods, feeling the full weight of his past decisions. I know I have a lot to make up for. But please, Elena, give me a chance to try." Thomas looks between his parents, sensing the tension but not fully understanding it. "Mommy, can Daddy come to my birthday party next week? I'm going to be a superhero, and all the superheroes need their dads." Elena's face softens at her son's plea. She looks at Richard, really looks at him, seeing the regret and longing in his eyes. After what feels like an eternity, she speaks. "We'll see, Thomas. Your father and I need to talk more first. But maybe it's not a yes, but it's not a no either." Richard feels a glimmer of hope, fragile but real. As the gala continues around them, the three of them sit at that table, navigating the uncertain waters of their newfound situation. Richard listens intently as Thomas regales him with stories of his adventures, drinking in every detail of his son's life that he's missed. Elena watches them, her emotions a turbulent mix of anger, hope, and a love she thought she'd buried long ago. She sees the way Richard hangs on every word Thomas says, the genuine interest and affection in his eyes. As the evening wears on, Richard realizes that the empire he's built, the deals he's closed, the fortune he's amassed, none of it compares to the simple joy of sitting here with his son and the woman he never stopped loving. But the path forward is far from clear. Trust, once broken, is not easily repaired. As they prepare to leave the gala, Richard knows that this is just the beginning of a long and challenging journey. "Elena," he says softly as they stand to go, "thank you for this. I know I don't deserve it, but I promise you, I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." Elena looks at him, her expression a complex blend of emotions. "Don't make promises you can't keep, Richard. Not again." As they part ways, Richard watching Elena and Thomas disappear into the night. He's filled with a determination he's never felt before. He knows that rebuilding his family will be the hardest thing he's ever done. But for the first time in years, he feels truly alive. The future is uncertain, but as Richard turns to leave the gala, he knows one thing for sure. He's not running away this time. Whatever it takes, he's gonna fight for his family. Sitting in his penthouse office, Richard stares blankly at the skyline he once saw as a testament to his success. Now, it feels hollow, meaningless compared to the family he left behind. A gentle knock on the door breaks his reverie. "Mr. Cole," his assistant calls out. "Your 2 o'clock is here." Richard blinks, momentarily disoriented. "Cancel it," he says abruptly. "Cancel everything for the rest of the week." "But sir, the merger—" "It can wait," Richard interrupts, his voice firm. He stands, grabbing his jacket. "I have more important matters to attend to." As he strides out of the office, ignoring the stunned looks from his employees, Richard feels a sense of purpose he hasn't experienced in years. He pulls out his phone, his finger hovering over Elena's number. After a moment's hesitation, he presses call. His heart races as the phone rings once, twice. "Richard." Elena's voice is guarded, cautious. "Elena, I know this is unexpected, but I was hoping we could talk. In person. There's so much I need to say, to explain." There's a long pause on the other end of the line. Richard holds his breath, afraid she'll hang up. Finally, Elena speaks. "All right, meet me at the park near our old apartment in an hour. Thomas will be at his playgroup." Relief washes over Richard. "Thank you, Elena. I'll be there." An hour later, Richard finds himself pacing nervously by the park fountain. He spots Elena approaching, her face a mask of careful neutrality. "Elena," he says softly as she reaches him. "Thank you for coming." She nods, her arms crossed protectively over her chest. "You said you wanted to talk. So talk." Richard takes a deep breath, gathering his courage. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since the gala. About my choices, about what really matters in life." He pauses, his voice thick with emotion. "I was wrong, Elena. So terribly wrong to leave you and Thomas. I thought I was building a future for us, but I was just running away from the responsibility of being a husband and father." Elena's expression softens slightly, but she remains silent, waiting for him to continue. "I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness," Richard continues, his voice breaking. "But I want you to know that I'm ready to do whatever it takes to be part of your lives again. To be the father Thomas deserves. And the man I should have been for you." Tears begin to well up in Elena's eyes. "It's not that simple, Richard. You can't just waltz back in after 3 years and expect everything to be okay. Do you have any idea how much your absence has hurt us? How many nights I've had to comfort Thomas when he asked why his daddy doesn't love him enough to be there." Richard feels each word like a knife to his heart. "I know," he whispers, "and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for that if you'll let me. I'm not asking for things to go back to the way they were. I'm asking for a chance to prove that I've changed, that I understand what really matters now." Elena studies him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. "And what about your work? Your empire? Are you really willing to give that up?" Without hesitation, Richard nods. "In a heartbeat. None of it means anything without you and Thomas. I've already started the process of stepping down from my position. I want to be here, Elena, fully present, for both of you." Surprise flickers across Elena's face, followed by a mix of hope and uncertainty. I don't know what to say, Richard. This is a lot to process." Richard takes a tentative step closer. "I understand. I'm not asking for an answer right now. All I'm asking is for a chance to show you, to show Thomas, that I'm committed to being the man and father you both deserve." Elena takes a shaky breath, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "It won't be easy," she warns. "There's a lot of hurt, a lot of trust to rebuild." "I know," Richard says softly, "but you and Thomas are worth it. You're worth everything." As they stand there in the park, the air heavy with unspoken emotions and tentative hope, Richard realizes that this is just the beginning of a long and challenging journey. But for the first time in years, he feels truly alive, truly purposeful. The path ahead is uncertain, filled with obstacles and potential. Heartbreak. But as he looks into Elena's eyes, seeing a glimmer of the love they once shared, Richard knows he's exactly where he needs to be. The real challenge, the real test of his character, is just beginning. One sunny afternoon, Richard finds himself standing outside Thomas's school, his heart racing with anticipation and nerves. Elena had agreed to let him pick up Thomas, a small but significant step in their journey of reconciliation. As the bell rings and children pour out of the building, Richard scans the crowd anxiously. Suddenly, he spots a familiar mop of curly hair and a red backpack. "Thomas," he calls out, waving. The little boy's head whips around, his eyes widening in surprise and excitement. "Daddy!" Thomas shouts, running towards Richard at full speed. Richard kneels down, opening his arms just in time to catch Thomas in a warm embrace. The feeling of his son in his arms is overwhelming, and Richard has to blink back tears. "Hey, buddy," he says softly, his voice thick with emotion. "How was school?" Thomas pulls back, his face beaming. "It was awesome. We learned about dinosaurs, and I drew a T-Rex eating a tree." Richard chuckles, standing up and taking Thomas's hand. "That sounds amazing. I'd love to see your drawing. Maybe we could go to the park and you could tell me all about it." Thomas nods enthusiastically. "Can we get ice cream too?" Of course, Richard agrees, his heart swelling with joy at this simple moment of fatherhood. As they walk towards the park, Thomas chattering excitedly about his day, Richard feels a sense of peace he hasn't experienced in years. At the park, they sit on a bench, ice cream cones in hand. Richard listens intently as Thomas regales him with stories of his school adventures, hanging on every word. "Daddy?" Thomas asks suddenly, his tone turning serious. "Are you going to go away again?" The question catches Richard off guard, and he feels a sharp pang of guilt. He sets his ice cream aside and turns to face his son fully. "No, Thomas," he says firmly. "I'm not going anywhere. I know I've been away for a long time, and I'm so sorry for that. But I promise you, I'm here to stay." Thomas's eyes search his face, as if trying to gauge the truth of his words. "Pinky promise?" he asks, holding out his little finger. Richard feels his throat tighten with emotion. He links his pinky with Thomas's, sealing the most important promise of his life. "Pinky promise," he says solemnly. Thomas seems satisfied with this, returning to his ice cream with renewed vigor. Richard watches him, marveling at the resilience and forgiveness of children. As the afternoon wears on, Richard finds himself dreading the moment they'll have to part. When it's time to take Thomas home, he feels a sense of loss, even knowing he'll see him again soon. At Elena's apartment, Thomas gives Richard a tight hug before running inside. Elena appears in the doorway, her expression a mix of gratitude and lingering caution. "Thank you for today," she says softly. "He had a wonderful time." Richard nods, his heart full. "So did I, Elena. I can't tell you how much this means to me." Elena's expression softens slightly. "It's a start, Richard. We still have a long way to go." "I know," Richard agrees. "And I'm committed to every step of that journey." As he turns to leave, Richard feels a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead is still uncertain, fraught with challenges and the weight of past mistakes. But for the first time in years, he feels truly alive, truly whole. The man who once valued business deals and corporate conquests above all else now understands the true meaning of success. It's not measured in dollars or market shares, but in the laughter of his son and the cautious hope in Elena's eyes. As Richard walks away from the apartment, he knows that the real work is just beginning. Rebuilding trust, healing old wounds, and becoming the father and man he should have been all along. These are the challenges that lie ahead. But with each step, he's more certain than ever that this is the most important journey of his life. Thomas greets him with unbridled enthusiasm, showing off his latest superhero drawings. Elena watches from the kitchen, a mix of warmth and wariness in her eyes. As they sit down to eat, the conversation flows more easily than expected, centered mostly around Thomas's adventures at school. But as the meal winds down and Thomas becomes engrossed in a new toy, the air thickens with tension. Elena clears her throat, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her water glass. "Richard, there's something we need to discuss." Richard's heart rate quickens. He nods, bracing himself for whatever may come. I've been offered a job, Elena continues, her voice barely above a whisper. It's an amazing opportunity, a chance to work with a renowned design firm. But it's in California. The words hit Richard like a physical blow. He feels the ground shift beneath him, the fragile new reality he's been building threatening to crumble. California? He manages to choke out. When would you leave? Elena's eyes meet his, filled with a storm of conflicting emotions. In 2 months, if I accept. It's not just about the job, Richard. I think the fresh start might be good for Thomas and me. Richard's mind reels. The thought of losing them again, just when he's starting to rebuild their relationship, is almost unbearable. But he forces himself to consider Elena's perspective, to think of what's best for her and Thomas. I understand, he says finally, his voice thick with suppressed emotion. You have to do what's best for you and Thomas. He pauses, struggling to find the right words. I've only just found you both again. The thought of losing you. Elena reaches across the table, hesitantly placing her hand on his. It's the first time she's initiated physical contact since his return, and the gesture sends a jolt through Richard. You wouldn't be losing us, Richard, she says softly. But I need to know, are you really committed to this? To us? Because if you are, we can figure something out. But if there's any part of you that might run again. Richard grasps her hand, his eyes locking with hers. Elena, listen to me. These past weeks have shown me what truly matters in life. You and Thomas, you're everything to me. I'll do whatever it takes to be with you both. If that means moving to California, starting over completely, I'll do it in a heartbeat. Tears well up in Elena's eyes. You'd leave everything behind? Your company, your life here. None of it means anything without you and Thomas, Richard says firmly. I've already set the wheels in motion to step down from my position. I'm ready for a new chapter, Elena. One where I'm the husband and father I should have been all along. Elena's breath catches, a mix of hope and disbelief crossing her face. Richard, I don't know what to say. Just then, Thomas bounds back into the room, oblivious to the emotional conversation that's just taken place. Daddy, can we play superheroes before you go? Richard looks at his son, then back at Elena. In that moment, he knows with absolute certainty what he needs to do. Of course we can, buddy, he says, standing up. In fact, how about we all play together? As they spend the rest of the evening engaged in an elaborate superhero adventure, Richard feels a sense of rightness, of belonging. The future is still uncertain, filled with challenges and decisions to be made. But for the first time in years, he's not afraid of what lies ahead. As he prepares to leave that night, Richard hugs Thomas tightly, then turns to Elena. Whatever you decide about California, he says softly, know that I'm all in. We're a family, and nothing, not distance, not past mistakes, is going to change that. Elena nods, her eyes shining with unshed tears. As Richard walks out into the night, he feels a mix of hope and determination. The road ahead may be difficult, but he's ready to face whatever comes, as long as he can face it with his family by his side. One particularly grueling day, Richard finds himself in his office, surrounded by stacks of legal documents and anxious executives. The weight of his decisions presses down on him, threatening to overwhelm him. Suddenly, his phone buzzes. It's a text from Elena. Thomas has a school play tonight. He really wants you to be there. Richard glances at the clock, then at the mountain of work before him. For a moment, he's torn between his old life and the new one he's fighting to build. Without hesitation, he stands up. We're done for today, he announces to the room. We'll continue this tomorrow. As he strides out of the office, ignoring the protests and confused looks, Richard feels a sense of liberation. He's choosing his family, unequivocally and without regret. He arrives at the school just as the play is about to begin, slipping into a seat next to Elena. She looks at him in surprise, a small smile playing at her lips. You made it, she whispers. Richard nods, his eyes fixed on the stage where Thomas is fidgeting in his costume. I wouldn't miss it for the world. As the play unfolds, a charmingly chaotic rendition of The Three Little Pigs, Richard finds himself more engaged than he's ever been in any board meeting. He laughs at Thomas's enthusiastic portrayal of the big bad wolf, his heart swelling with pride. When it's over and Thomas runs to them, beaming with excitement, Richard scoops him up in a big hug. "You were amazing, buddy. The best big bad wolf I've ever seen." Thomas giggles, his eyes shining. "Did you see me blow the houses down, Daddy?" "Whoosh. I sure did," Richard chuckles. "You nearly blew me out of my seat." As they walk out of the school together, Thomas between them holding both their hands, Richard feels a sense of completeness he's never experienced before. Elena turns to him, her expression soft. "Thank you for coming, Richard. It meant a lot to Thomas. And to me." Richard meets her gaze, his heart pounding. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be." "Elena, I've been thinking about what you said, about California." She tenses slightly, waiting for him to continue. "I want you to take the job," he says firmly. "It's an amazing opportunity for you. And I want to come with you, both of you, if you'll have me." Elena's eyes widen in surprise. "Richard, are you sure? Your whole life is here. Your company." "My whole life is right here," Richard says, squeezing Thomas's hand and looking meaningfully at Elena. "The company, the money, the success, and none of it matters without you two. I'm ready for a fresh start." Elena. Together, tears well up in Elena's eyes. "Oh, Richard," she whispers. Thomas looks up at them, confused by the emotional exchange. "Are we going on a trip?" Richard kneels down to his son's level. "How would you like to go on a big adventure, buddy? To live in a new place, near the ocean?" Thomas's eyes light up. "Like superheroes on a mission?" "Exactly like that," Richard laughs. The Cole family superhero team, taking on California. As Thomas cheers excitedly, Richard stands back up, meeting Elena's gaze. The air between them is charged with possibility, with hope for a future they never thought they'd have. "So," Richard says softly, "what do you say? Are you ready for our next big adventure?" Elena takes a deep breath, looking from Richard to Thomas and back again. In her eyes, Richard can see the same mix of excitement and trepidation that he feels. "Yes," she finally says, a smile breaking across her face. "Yes, I think we are." As they walk towards home, planning their new life together, Richard feels a profound sense of peace. The road ahead won't be easy. There are still wounds to heal, trust to rebuild. But for the first time in years, he's exactly where he's meant to be, with the people who matter most. The future stretches out before them, full of promise and possibility. And Richard Cole, once driven solely by ambition and success, now understands that the greatest adventure of all is the one he's embarking on with his family. "Mr. Cole," his assistant's voice is tense. "There's been a leak to the press. They know about your resignation and about your family situation." Richard's blood runs cold. He'd been so focused on rebuilding his relationships, he hadn't considered the public fallout of his decisions. As if on cue, his phone explodes with notifications. News alerts, social media mentions, and messages from business associates flood in. The headlines are sensational. Tycoon abandons empire for secret family. Coal Industries in chaos, AS CEO steps down. From boardroom to playground. Richard Cole's shocking choice. Richard's mind races. He'd wanted to handle this on his own terms, to protect Elena and Thomas from the media circus. Now that choice has been ripped away from him. He rushes back inside, finding Elena in the kitchen. One look at his face tells her something is wrong. "Richard? What is it?" she asks, concern etching her features. He takes a deep breath. "The press found out. About us, about my resignation. It's everywhere." Elena's eyes widen in shock. "How? I thought we were being careful." "I don't know," Richard says, running a hand through his hair. "But we need to be prepared. They'll be coming after us for statements, photos. It's going to get ugly." As if on cue, Thomas bounds into the kitchen. "Daddy, can we go to the park today?" Richard and Elena exchange a look, the weight of their new reality settling upon them. How do they protect their son from the media frenzy that's about to descend? Buddy, Richard says, kneeling down to Thomas's level. We might need to stay inside for a little while. There are some people who want to ask Daddy a lot of questions, and they might bother us if we go out. Thomas's face falls. But why? Did you do something bad? The innocent question hits Richard like a punch to the gut. No, son, he says softly. I did something good. I chose to be with you and Mommy. But some people don't understand that. Elena steps in, her voice gentle but firm. Thomas, remember how we talked about your daddy being an important businessman? Well, some people are surprised that he's leaving his job to be with us. They're curious and want to know more. Thomas nods slowly, trying to process this. Like when Billy at school wanted to know why I didn't have a dad before. And now I do. Richard feels a lump form in his throat. Yes, buddy. Kind of like that. But we're going to handle this together as a family. Okay? Thomas straightens up, a determined look on his face. Okay, we're like superheroes, right? We can face anything. Despite the gravity of the situation, Richard can't help but smile. That's right, we are. As Thomas runs off to continue packing his toys, Richard turns to Elena. The fear and uncertainty in her eyes mirror his own. Elena, I'm so sorry, he begins. I never meant for this to dash. She cuts him off, placing a hand on his arm. We knew this wouldn't be easy, Richard. We'll face this together. Richard nods, drawing strength from her touch. I'll call my PR team, try to get ahead of this. We might need to move up our timeline for California. Elena takes a deep breath. Whatever it takes. We've come too far to let this derail us now. As they stand there in the kitchen, the sound of Thomas playing in the background, Richard feels a mix of fear and determination. The road ahead has suddenly become much rockier, but he's more certain than ever that he's on the right path. The world outside may be in chaos, clamoring for explanations and sensational stories. But in this moment, in this kitchen, Richard Cole knows he's exactly where he needs to be. The real challenge lies ahead, protecting his family while navigating the storm of public opinion. But for the first time in his life, he's ready to fight for something truly worth fighting for. Inside, Richard paces back and forth, his phone seemingly glued to his ear as he tries to manage the fallout. Elena does her best to maintain a sense of normalcy for Thomas, but the strain is evident in the tight lines around her eyes and the forced cheerfulness in her voice. On the third day of their self-imposed confinement, the tension finally boils over. Thomas, frustrated by the sudden restrictions on his life, throws a tantrum. I want to go outside, he wails, tears streaming down his face. Why can't we go to the park? I hate this. Elena tries to comfort him, but Thomas pushes her away, running to his room and slamming the door. The sound echoes through the apartment, a stark reminder of the toll this situation is taking on all of them. Richard ends his call, the weight of guilt heavy on his shoulders. He turns to Elena, his voice thick with emotion. This is all my fault. I should have been more careful. Should have protected you both better. Elena shakes her head, reaching out to take his hand. We're in this together, remember? We knew it wouldn't be easy. Just then, Richard's phone buzzes again. He glances at it, his face paling. It's the board. They're calling an emergency meeting. They want to force me out completely. Elena's eyes widen in shock. Can they do that? Richard nods grimly. If they have enough votes, yes. And after this scandal, I'm not sure I have many allies left. The weight of the moment hangs heavy between them. Everything they've been working towards, their fresh start, their new life together, suddenly seems to be slipping away. Suddenly, Thomas's door creaks open. He peeks out, his face tear-stained but curious. Daddy, are you going to lose your job because of me? Richard's heart breaks at the question. He kneels down, opening his arms, and Thomas runs into them. No, buddy, he says softly. This isn't because of you. It's because I made some mistakes in the past. But I'm trying to fix them now. Thomas looks up at him, his eyes wide. Like when I broke Mommy's vase and tried to hide it. But then I told the truth and helped clean up. Richard can't help but chuckle at the comparison. Yeah, kind of like that. Sometimes even grown-ups make mistakes. But what matters is how we fix them. Elena joins them, wrapping her arms around both Richard and Thomas. And we fix them together, she adds softly. As they stand there, holding each other, Richard feels a surge of determination. He may be losing his company, his fortune, his old life, but he's gained something far more precious. I have an idea, he says suddenly. It's risky, but I think it might be our best shot at getting through this. Elena looks at him questioningly. What are you thinking? Richard takes a deep breath. We face this head-on. No more hiding, no more letting others control the narrative. We tell our story, on our terms. You mean, talk to the press? Elena asks, concern evident in her voice. Richard nods. One interview. We choose the reporter, we set the terms. We show the world who we really are, not the caricatures they've created. Thomas pipes up, excitement replacing his earlier distress. Can I be on TV too? Like a real superhero? Richard and Elena exchange a look, a mix of apprehension and resolve passing between them. This could change everything, for better or worse. Are you sure about this? Elena asks softly. Richard meets her gaze, his eyes filled with a fierce determination. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. We're a family, and it's time the world knew it. As they begin to plan their next move, the atmosphere in the apartment shifts. The fear and uncertainty are still there, but they're tempered now by a sense of purpose, of unity. Outside, the media frenzy continues unabated. But inside, the Cole family stands together, ready to face whatever comes next. The road ahead is uncertain, fraught with challenges they can't even imagine. But for the first time since the storm began, they feel a glimmer of hope. Richard looks at Elena and Thomas, his heart full of love and determination. Whatever happens next, they'll face it together. And in that moment, he knows that no matter what he loses, he's already won what truly matters. Are you ready for this? She asks softly, her eyes meeting his in the mirror. Richard takes a deep breath, steadying himself. As ready as I'll ever be. Where's Thomas? As if on cue, their son bursts into the room, a whirlwind of energy in his little superhero costume. I'm ready, Daddy. Do I look like a real superhero? Richard kneels down, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride and anxiety. You look perfect, buddy. Remember what we talked about? Thomas nods solemnly. Be myself and tell the truth, just like real superheroes do. That's right, Richard says, ruffling his son's hair. We're all going to be superheroes today. The doorbell rings, signaling the arrival of the interview crew. Elena takes a deep breath, squeezing Richard's hand. Here we go. As they make their way to the living room, now transformed into a makeshift studio, Richard feels a surge of protectiveness. He's faced hostile takeovers and cutthroat negotiations, but nothing has ever felt as high stakes as this moment. The interviewer, a respected journalist named Sarah Chun, greets them warmly. Thank you for agreeing to this, she says, her tone professional but kind. I know it can't be easy. Richard nods, his arm around Elena's waist. We appreciate your willingness to hear our side of the story. As the cameras start rolling, Sarah begins with the questions they've prepared for. Richard and Elena take turns answering, their voices steady as they recount their history, their separation, and their recent reconciliation. But it's when Sarah turns to Thomas that the interview takes an unexpected turn. Thomas, she says gently, can you tell me what it's like to have your daddy back in your life? Thomas, who had been fidgeting slightly, suddenly sits up straight. His eyes, so like Richard's, are clear and earnest as he speaks. It's the best thing ever, he says with the unfiltered honesty of a child. Daddy used to be away fighting bad guys in the business world, but now he's here fighting to be the best daddy. And that's what real superheroes do. The simplicity and sincerity of Thomas's words hit Richard like a physical blow. He feels tears pricking at his eyes, a lump forming in his throat. Sarah, clearly moved, turns back to Richard. Mr. Cole, your son's words are quite powerful. How does it make you feel to hear that? Richard takes a shaky breath, his composure cracking. It reminds me of why I'm doing this, why I left everything behind. He looks at Thomas, then at Elena, his voice thick with emotion. I spent years chasing success, thinking it would make me happy. But true happiness was right here all along. I just couldn't see it. Elena reaches out, taking his hand. We've all made mistakes, she adds softly. But what matters is that we're trying to fix them, together. As the interview continues, Richard feels a weight lifting from his shoulders. They're not just telling their story. They're reclaiming it, reshaping the narrative that had spiraled out of their control. When the cameras finally stop rolling, there's a moment of profound silence. Sarah Chun stands, her professional demeanor softening. Thank you, she says quietly. I think you've given people a lot to think about. As the crew packs up their equipment, Richard, Elena, and Thomas remain on the couch, holding each other close. The future is still uncertain. The board meeting looms, public opinion is fickle, and their move to California hangs in the balance. But in this moment, none of that seems to matter. Richard looks at his family, feeling a sense of peace he's never known before. Whatever comes next, they'll face it together. So, Thomas pipes up, breaking the silence. Did we save the day like real superheroes? Richard laughs, pulling his son close. We sure did, buddy. We sure did. As the afternoon sun streams through the windows, bathing the room in a warm glow, the Cole family sits together, united and strong. The storm isn't over, but for the first time, they can see the possibility of clear skies ahead. And Richard Cole, once driven by ambition and greed, now understands that the greatest success story of all is the one he's writing with his family. On the morning of the board meeting, Richard stands in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie one last time. The face that looks back at him is different from the one he saw just weeks ago, older, perhaps, but with a newfound peace in his eyes. Elena appears behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. Are you ready? She asks softly. Richard takes a deep breath. As ready as I'll ever be. Whatever happens in there, Elena, I want you to know that I don't regret a single moment of this. You and Thomas are worth more than any company. She turns him to face her, her eyes shining with unshed tears. We're with you, Richard. All the way. As Richard prepares to leave, Thomas runs up to him, holding out a crudely drawn picture. I made this for you, Daddy. It's us as superheroes, fighting the bad guys together. Richard kneels down, taking the picture with trembling hands. In that moment, he feels a surge of strength unlike anything he's ever experienced in the boardroom. Thank you, buddy, he says, his voice thick with emotion. This is exactly what I need today. With one last hug for his family, Richard heads out to face the board. The ride to Cole Industries headquarters is tense, the city passing by in a blur. As he enters the imposing building, he's met with a mix of curious stares and whispered conversations. The boardroom falls silent as Richard walks in. He takes his seat at the head of the table, facing the men and women who once followed his every command without question. Now, their faces are a mix of judgment, curiosity, and in a few cases, something that might be respect. Mr. Cole, the lead director, begins, his voice stern. We've called this meeting to discuss the recent events and their impact on the company. Your actions have caused significant disruption and potential damage to our brand. We need to decide on a path forward. Richard nods, his face calm. I understand, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all directly. He pauses, looking around the room. For years, I led this company with a single-minded focus on growth and profit. I thought that was what mattered most. I was wrong. A murmur ripples through the room. Richard continues, his voice growing stronger. What I've learned over these past weeks is that true success isn't measured in stock prices or market share. It's measured in the lives we touch, the relationships we build. He pulls out Thomas's drawing, holding it up for all to see. This is what really matters. And if choosing my family means losing my position here, then it's a price I'm willing to pay. The room is silent for a long moment. Then, to Richard's surprise, one of the younger board members speaks up. Mr. Cole, I admire what you're doing. It takes courage to admit when you've been wrong, to change course. Another board member nods in agreement. Perhaps there's a way to move forward that doesn't require such drastic measures. A way for you to balance your family commitments with a role in the company. The lead director looks thoughtful. It's an unconventional approach, but then again, these are unconventional times. Mr. Cole, would you be open to discussing a new arrangement? One that allows you to step back from day-to-day operations but remain involved in strategic decisions. Richard feels a wave of emotion wash over him. This isn't at all what he expected. Yes, I would be very open to that discussion. As the meeting continues, the atmosphere in the room shifts. What started as a potential ousting becomes a collaborative brainstorming session. Ideas are thrown around, remote work options, flexible schedules, even the possibility of opening a West Coast office to accommodate Richard's move to California. Hours later, as Richard leaves the building, he feels a sense of lightness he hasn't experienced in years. He pulls out his phone, dialing Elena's number with shaking fingers. How did it go? She answers on the first ring, her voice tense with worry. Richard takes a deep breath, a smile spreading across his face. It went better than I could have ever imagined. Elena, we did it. We really did it. As he walks down the street, heading home to his family, Richard Cole feels like he's walking on air. The future stretches out before him, full of possibilities he never dared to dream of. It won't be easy balancing work and family, never is. But for the first time in his life, he feels truly, completely whole. The man who once thought he had it all now understands that he's only just beginning to discover what real wealth looks like. And as he rounds the corner, eager to share the news with Elena and Thomas, Richard knows that the greatest adventure of his life is just beginning. Inside, he can hear Elena's laughter mixing with Thomas's excited chatter. The sound fills him with a warmth that no business deal ever could. Just as he's about to join them, his phone buzzes. It's a message from his assistant back in New York. Urgent call from Marcus Harding. Says it's about the merger. Should I patch him through? Richard hesitates, his finger hovering over the screen. In the past, he would have jumped at the chance to discuss business, no matter the hour. But now, Daddy, come quick. I built a super tall tower. Thomas's voice rings out from inside. With a smile, Richard types a quick reply. Tell Marcus I'll call him in the morning. Family time now. As he puts his phone away, Elena appears. In the doorway, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. Everything okay? Richard nods, wrapping an arm around her waist as they walk back inside. Everything's perfect. Just remembering what's really important. They enter the living room to find Thomas surrounded by an elaborate construction of blocks and action figures. His face lights up as he sees them. Look, Daddy, it's Cole Tower, but better because it has superheroes. Richard kneels down, marveling at his son's creation. Wow, buddy, that's incredible. Tell me all about it. As Thomas launches into an enthusiastic explanation of his superhero skyscraper, Elena catches Richard's eye. There's a question in her gaze, a hint of the old worry that this new life might not be enough for him. Richard gives her a reassuring smile, one that reaches his eyes in a way it never did in his corporate days. I was just thinking, he says softly, about how lucky I am, how this, right here, is everything I ever needed. Elena's eyes mist over, and she squeezes his hand. We're the lucky ones, Richard. You've become the man I always knew you could be. Their moment is interrupted by Thomas tugging on Richard's sleeve. Daddy, can we go to the beach tomorrow? I want to build a sand version of Cole Tower. Richard laughs, scooping his son up in his arms. Absolutely. And maybe we can add a moat and some sea monster defenders. What do you think? As Thomas cheers in excitement, Richard feels a sense of contentment wash over him. The mergers, the deals, the corporate chess games, they all pale in comparison to this moment. Later that night, as Richard tucks Thomas into bed, his son looks up at him with serious eyes. Daddy, are you happy here? Do you miss being a big boss? The question catches Richard off guard, but he doesn't hesitate in his answer. I'm happier than I've ever been, Thomas. Being here with you and Mommy, that's the most important job I could ever have. Thomas nods, satisfied. Good. Because I like having a superhero dad. As Richard turns out the light and quietly leaves the room, he feels a lump in his throat. He makes his way back to the balcony, where Elena is waiting with 2 glasses of wine. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asks, handing him a glass. Richard takes a sip, gathering his words. "I was just thinking about how close I came to losing all of this. How blind I was for so long." Elena leans into him, her presence a comforting warmth. "But you found your way back to us. That's what matters." As they stand there, looking out over the moonlit ocean, Richard feels a sense of peace he never knew was possible. The future stretches out before them, full of promise and possibility. There will be challenges, of course, balancing his reduced role at the company with his commitment to family, navigating this new life they're building together. But for the first time, Richard Cole isn't afraid of the unknown. He's embracing it with his family by his side. As he pulls Elena closer, placing a soft kiss on her temple, he knows that this moment, this life, is the true meaning of success. The story of Richard Cole, the tycoon who rediscovered his heart, is far from over. But now, every chapter is filled with the love, laughter, and adventures of the family he almost lost. And as the stars twinkle overhead, Richard knows that he's exactly where he's meant to be. He slips out of bed, careful not to wake Elena, and makes his way to the kitchen. As he brews a pot of coffee, his eyes fall on a framed photo on the counter. A candid shot of him, Elena, and Thomas laughing on the beach. It's a stark reminder of how much has changed, and how much is at stake. Lost in thought, he doesn't hear Elena approach until she wraps her arms around him from behind. Nervous, she asks softly, resting her chin on his shoulder. Richard lets out a shaky breath. "Is it that obvious?" Elena turns him to face her, her eyes filled with understanding and support. "You've got this, Richard. This office isn't just about business. It's about the life we're building here. Together." He nods, drawing strength from her words. I want to prove that I can do this, that I can be a good father, a good husband, and still contribute to the company." "You already are," Elena assures him, cupping his face in her hands. "And today, everyone else will see it too." Their moment is interrupted by the patter of little feet. Thomas bursts into the kitchen, already dressed in a mini suit that matches Richard's. "I'm ready for work, Daddy," he announces proudly, striking a pose that's eerily reminiscent of Richard's old boardroom stance. Richard and Elena exchange an amused glance before bursting into laughter. The tension breaks, and Richard feels his nerves settling. "You look very professional, buddy," Richard says, kneeling down to Thomas's level. "But remember, you've got an important job today, too." Thomas nods solemnly. "I know. I'm the official ribbon cutter." As they prepare for the day ahead, Richard feels a strange mix of his old confidence and a new, more grounded sense of purpose. This isn't just about impressing shareholders or outmaneuvering competitors. It's about creating a legacy his family can be proud of. The drive to the new office is filled with Thomas's excited chatter and Elena's calming presence. As they pull up to the sleek, modern building with Cole Industries emblazoned across the front, Richard takes a deep breath. "Here we go," he murmurs, more to himself than anyone else. The opening ceremony is a whirlwind of handshakes, speeches, and camera flashes. Richard moves through it all with a grace that surprises even himself, seamlessly blending his business acumen with genuine warmth. When it's time for the ribbon cutting, Richard lifts Thomas onto his shoulders. "Ready, buddy?" he asks, handing Thomas the oversized scissors. "Ready, Daddy," Thomas declares, his face a picture of concentration as he snips the ribbon. The crowd erupts in applause, and as Richard sets Thomas down, he catches Elena's eye in the audience. The pride and love shining in her gaze nearly overwhelms him. As the day winds down and the last of the guests depart, Richard finds himself alone in his new office. He stands by the window, looking out at the California sunset, when there's a soft knock at the door. Elena enters, Thomas in tow. "How are you feeling?" she asks, joining him by the window. Richard takes a moment to reflect, surprising himself with his answer. Grateful, he says finally. A year ago, I thought I had everything, but I was so wrong. Thomas, this new chapter, this is everything. Thomas tugs on Richard's sleeve. Daddy, can we go home now? I want to build a Lego version of your new office. Richard laughs, scooping his son up. Absolutely, buddy. I think that's the perfect way to end this day. As they walk out together, Richard's hand intertwined with Elena's and Thomas chattering away in his arms. He feels a profound sense of rightness. The path ahead isn't clear or easy, balancing family and work never is. But he's no longer afraid of the challenges. For the first time in his life, Richard Cole understands that true success isn't measured in profits or power, but in moments like these. As they step out into the warm California evening, he knows that whatever the future holds, they'll face it together as a